Nora Calloway found the first body on a Tuesday, or what was left of it. It was not a body in the way you might think. No flesh, no bones, no remains that any coroner could identify. It was a shape, a human-shaped impression pressed into the mud along the canal bank at mile marker 107, as if someone had lain down in the wet earth and been absorbed into it. Every detail was perfect: the curve of the spine, the splay of the fingers, the slight turn of the head. Even the folds of clothing were preserved in the mud like a fossil. But the person was gone, just gone, absorbed. The mud had taken them the way a lake takes a stone. And when Nora knelt beside that impression and put her hand against the cold, wet earth, she felt something that made her pull back so fast she stumbled. A heartbeat, faint, slow, coming from deep underneath the ground, as if the canal itself had a pulse. The Chesapeake and Ohio Canal runs 184 miles along the Potomac River, from Georgetown in Washington, D.C., all the way to Cumberland, Maryland. It was built in the 1800s, blasted and dug and hauled into existence by thousands of hands, most of them belonging to men whose names nobody bothered to record. They cut through rock and clay and limestone. They drained swamps and moved rivers and flattened mountains because someone in a boardroom decided that cargo needed to move west. The canal operated for nearly 100 years before the railroad made it irrelevant. And now it sits as a national historical park, a long, quiet, tree-lined corridor that hikers and cyclists and history enthusiasts walk without ever thinking about what is underneath their feet. The water is still there, dark and flat and patient. The towpath is still there. Packed dirt and gravel and the compressed memory of a million footsteps. This story takes place along that canal. The people are fictional. The events are fictional. But the place is real, and sometimes real places hold things that fiction is the only safe way to talk about. Nora Calloway was 31 years old, a park ranger stationed at the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal National Historical Park, assigned to the western section, the long, remote stretch between Hancock and Cumberland, where the canal runs through deep forest and the nearest town is always further away than you want it to be. She had taken the job 3 years ago after leaving the Baltimore Police Department. She does not talk about why she left. When people asked, and people always asked, because a woman leaving law enforcement to become a park ranger feels like a story with missing pieces, she gave the same answer every time. She said she wanted quiet. She said she wanted trees instead of concrete. She said she was tired. All of that was true. None of it was the whole truth. The whole truth was a 13-year-old boy named Darius Mitchell, who had been reported missing on a Tuesday in March, and whose body Nora found 6 days later in the basement of a row house in East Baltimore. She was the first officer through the door. She was the one who found him. She was the one who had to stand in that basement and look at what had been done to a child, and then walk back up the stairs and tell his mother, who was standing on the sidewalk in her bathrobe, that they had found her son. Nora did not sleep for 11 days after that. Not insomnia, not the kind where you lie in bed and cannot drift off. She physically could not close her eyes without seeing that basement. Her body refused to let go of consciousness because consciousness was the only barrier between her and that room. She finished the case, she filed the reports, she sat through the trial. She watched the man who did it get sentenced. And then she walked into her captain's office and set her badge on his desk and said, "I'm done." He did not argue. He had seen her eyes, and he knew that whatever had been behind them when she started the job was no longer there. The C&O Canal was supposed to be the opposite of that: quiet, slow, predictable. And for the first 2 years, it was. Nora patrolled the towpath, maintained trail markers. educated hikers about leave no trace, rescued the occasional kayaker who underestimated the Potomac's current. Simple work, clean work, the kind of work that lets your brain cool down the way an engine cools after a long drive. But then October came, and the water changed. It was not something she could point to and say, "There, that's when it started." It was more like a feeling. A shift in pressure, the way a room feels different when someone is standing behind you, even before you turn around. The canal water along her section, particularly the 8-mile stretch from mile 104 to 112, had always been still. Dark green in summer, brown in fall, sometimes iced over in winter. It did not move because canal water does not move. It has no current. It has no source feeding it anymore. It just sits. But sometime in early October, Nora noticed that the water in that section had turned black. Not dark black, the kind of black that does not reflect light. The kind of black that looks like a hole cut into the surface of the earth. She mentioned it to Glenn Hooper, the senior ranger at the Hancock station. Glenn was 58, had worked the canal for 22 years, and had the weathered, unhurried demeanor of a man who had seen every variety of stupidity the outdoors could produce. Algae bloom, Glenn said without looking up from his paperwork, happens every fall. Water gets stagnant, temperature drops, organic matter breaks down. Turns the water dark. Not dark, Nora said, black like ink. Glenn looked up. He studied her face for a moment. "You've been walking the western stretch after sundown?" "No." "Good. Don't. Why?" Glenn went back to his paperwork. "Bad footing. Low visibility." Nora waited for more. There was no more. Glenn had closed the conversation the way he closed everything, with a practical answer that covered the surface and left everything underneath untouched. She let it go. 2 weeks later, on October 17th, a hiker named Paul Dugan was reported missing. Paul was 44, a dentist from Hagerstown, an experienced trail walker who had hiked the entire C&O towpath 3 times in the past decade. He was doing a solo section hike, Hancock to Cumberland, 4 days, camping along the way. He checked in with his wife on the first night, did not check in on the second. His wife called the park service on the morning of the 3rd day. Nora was part of the search team. They started at Paul's last known position, a campsite near mile marker 106, and worked outward. His tent was still set up. His pack was inside. His food bag was hanging properly from a bare line. His boots were beside the tent. His water bottle was half full. Everything was there except Paul. They searched for 4 days. Dogs, drones, volunteers. They walked every inch of towpath from mile 100 to mile 115. They checked the canal. They checked the river. They checked the woods on both sides, pushing through undergrowth and scrambling up ridges and calling his name until their voices gave out. Nothing, no tracks, no clothing, no sign that Paul Dugan had done anything after setting up camp except vanish. The official report listed him as a missing person, probable cause unknown. The assumption, unwritten but understood, was that he had gone down to the river at night, slipped on wet rock, been carried downstream. The Potomac can move a body miles before depositing it on a bank somewhere. It had happened before. It would happen again. Nora did not believe it. She had stood at Paul's campsite and looked at his boots, sitting neatly beside the tent, laces tucked in, placed side by side with the precision of a man who takes care of his things, and she knew. She knew the way she had known things as a cop, not evidence, instinct. The bone-deep certainty that what she was being told and what was true were not the same thing. Paul Dugan had not gone to the river. Paul Dugan had gone to the canals. She went back to his campsite alone after the search was called off. It was late afternoon. The light was amber and low, filtering through trees that were starting to let go of their leaves. The towpath was empty. The forest was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that means everything is listening. Nora walked from Paul's campsite to the canal bank. It was about 30 yards through tall grass and scrub. The ground sloped gently downward to the water's edge, where the mud was soft and black and smelled like something old. Not rotten, old, the way a stone cellar smells, the way a closed room smells after years of being shut. The water was black, perfectly, absolutely black, no reflection, no surface movement. No insects skating across the top. It looked less like water and more like an absence of water, a space where water should be, but something else was instead. Nora crouched at the bank. She looked at the mud. There were footprints. A single set leading from the grass to the water's edge. Men's bare feet. The right size for a man of Paul's height. They walked in a straight line, evenly spaced, no stumbling, no hesitation. They walked directly to the edge of the black water and they stopped. No. They did not stop. They continued into the water. Nora could see the last print, half on the bank, half in the water, pressed into the mud at the point where land became liquid. The front of the foot pushed deeper than the heel. He had been leaning forward. Stepping in deliberately, there were no prints coming back out. Nora stared at the water, at the black, motionless surface that held no reflection, not even of the sky directly above it. She pulled out her flashlight and pointed it at the water. The beam hit the surface and died, did not penetrate, did not scatter. Just stopped, as if the water had absorbed it. She reached down and touched the surface with one finger. The water was warm, not lukewarm, warm, like bathwater, like skin. She pulled her hand back. Her finger was clean, no algae, no residue, no discoloration. But the sensation lingered, a warmth that traveled up her finger and into her hand and settled in her wrist like a pulse. Nora stood up and walked back to the towpath and drove to the Hancock station and sat in her truck for 20 minutes with the engine running and her hands on the steering wheel and her mind doing something it had not done in 3 years. It was putting pieces together, cop pieces, pattern pieces. The kind of thinking she had walked away from because the last time she followed it, it led her to a basement. She went inside and pulled the records. In the past 12 years, 7 people had gone missing along the western stretch of the C&O Canal between mile markers 104 and 112. 7 all solo hikers or campers, all during the fall. All between mid-October and late November. All officially listed as missing persons, with probable cause noted as accidental drowning or exposure. None of the bodies had ever been recovered. 7 people, 12 years. All in the same 8-mile stretch, all in the same 6-week window. Nora spread the files across the station's conference table and stared at them. 7 faces looked back at her from photocopied driver's licenses and missing person flyers. Different ages, different backgrounds, different reasons for being on the trail. A retired teacher, a college student. A couple on their anniversary, that was 2 of the 7, a husband and wife who vanished on the same night. A photographer, a veteran, and now Paul Dugan. The only common thread, besides the location and the season, was something so subtle Nora almost missed it. She found it in the incident reports, the initial interviews with friends and family members conducted in the days following each disappearance. In every single case, someone close to the missing person had said some version of the same thing. They had not been themselves lately. The retired teacher's daughter said her mother had been distant for weeks. The college student's roommate said he had stopped going to class and spent hours staring out the window. The photographer's partner said she had become obsessed with water, taking hundreds of photos of rivers, lakes, puddles, rain on glass. The veteran's brother said he had started sleepwalking for the first time in his life. And that twice. His wife had found him standing at the kitchen sink with the faucet running, staring into the drain. Something had been pulling them, not physically, psychologically. Something had gotten inside their heads before they ever set foot on the towpath. And by the time they arrived at the canal, they were already halfway gone. Nora closed the files. She sat in the empty station and listened to the clock on the wall and the wind against the windows and the faint, distant sound of water that she told herself was the Potomac. She told herself a lot of things over the next few days. She told herself that correlation is not causation. That 7 people over 12 years, in a remote section of a 184-mile trail, was statistically unremarkable. That people go missing in national parks all the time. That she was projecting, seeing patterns because her cop brain wanted patterns. Needed patterns, could not accept the formless, random cruelty of a universe where people simply disappear. She told herself all of this, and none of it held. Because at night, when she lay in her small apartment above the hardware store in Hancock and closed her eyes, she heard something, not with her ears, deeper than that. She heard it the way you hear your own heartbeat when a room gets quiet enough, not a sound so much as an awareness of a sound. Water moving water, not the Potomac's rush, something slower, something rhythmic. Like breathing. Like the canal itself was inhaling and exhaling in long, patient cycles. And it had been doing this for a very long time. And it would continue doing this for a very long time. And everything that happened on its surface, the boats, the mules, the men, the hikers, the rangers, was nothing more than a disturbance on the skin of something that ran deep enough to touch the center of the earth. She started dreaming about the canal. In the dreams, she was walking the towpath at night. The trees were black columns on either side. The sky was starless. The only light came from the water, a faint, greenish-blue luminescence that pulsed slowly. Like something alive beneath the surface was glowing. And as she walked, she became aware that she was not alone. That there were figures in the water, standing upright, submerged to their shoulders, facing her. Dozens of them, silent, still. Their faces pale and their eyes open and their mouths slightly parted, as if they were about to speak but had forgotten how. She recognized them, the teacher, the student, the couple, the photographer, the veteran. Paul Dugan, they were all there, standing in the black water, looking at her. And they were not afraid. That was the worst part. They were not suffering. They were not screaming. They were at peace. A terrible, absolute, inhuman peace that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with surrender. Nora woke from these dreams drenched in sweat, her sheets twisted around her legs, her mouth dry, her heart slamming against her ribs. She would get up and go to the bathroom and turn on the faucet and splash water on her face and look at herself in the mirror and try to see the woman she had been before all of this. But the woman in the mirror was changing. There were shadows under her eyes that had not been there a month ago. Her cheeks were thinner. Her eyes had a quality she recognized from Darius Mitchell's mother, the look of someone who is carrying knowledge that is too heavy for a human being to carry alone. She called Glenn, asked to meet him at the station. When he arrived, she showed him the files. The 7 missing persons, the pattern, the timeline, the behavioral changes reported by family members. She laid it all out the way she would have laid out a case file back in Baltimore, systematic, logical, evidence-based. Glenn listened. He did not interrupt. He did not dismiss. He sat across from her with his hands folded on the table and his face unreadable, and he let her finish. When she was done, he was quiet for a long time. "You're not the first person to notice," he said. Nora felt the floor shift under her, not literally, but the ground on which she had built her understanding of this place, This job, this quiet life she had constructed to keep herself sane, it shifted. What? A ranger named Bill Combs noticed it in 2008. He pulled the same files, drew the same lines. He went to the regional office with it, and they told him what I am going to tell you. That missing persons in remote parks are statistically normal. That the western stretch is rugged terrain with poor cell coverage and limited visibility. That the Potomac has taken plenty of people and given back very few. That the pattern you see is the pattern your brain creates when it wants to find meaning in randomness. And what did Bill say to that? Bill quit, Glenn paused. About 3 months after he pulled those files. He went home to Michigan and never came back. Why? Glenn unfolded his hands. He placed them flat on the table because Bill went walking on the western stretch after dark, trying to prove something, trying to gather evidence. I don't know exactly what he experienced out there, and he didn't tell me the details. But he came into this station the next morning, looking like a man who had seen something that broke a part of his brain that he needed for everyday functioning. He looked at me and he said, "Glenn, the canal is not empty," and then he packed his office and drove away. Nora stared at him. "And you never investigated." Investigated what? A feeling, a hunch. Water that looks funny in the fall. Glenn's voice was not dismissive. It was exhausted, the weariness of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had chosen to carry it quietly. "I have worked this canal for 22 years, Nora. I have felt what you are feeling. I have heard what you are hearing. And I made a decision a long time ago that the best thing I can do, the only thing I can do, is keep people off that stretch after dark and not ask questions that do not have answers I want to hear. People are disappearing. Glenn, people disappear everywhere. Not like this. Not with this pattern." Glenn stood up. He pulled on his jacket. He looked at Nora with something she had never seen in his face before. Fear. Real, deep, practiced fear, the kind that has been lived with so long it has become a companion rather than an enemy. "Walk away from this, Nora, please. You came here to get away from something dark. Don't walk into something darker." He left. Nora sat in the station alone. The clock ticked, the wind blew. And somewhere in the distance, further away than the Potomac, deeper than the groundwater, older than the canal itself, she heard that breathing. That slow, patient, rhythmic breathing. She should have listened to Glenn. She should have closed the files and locked the cabinet and gone home and gone to bed and gotten up in the morning and done her job and let the canal keep its secrets. But Nora was not built that way. She had never been built that way. It was the thing that made her a good cop and a terrible human being. The inability to leave a door closed when she knew there was something behind it. Even when the last door she opened had contained a dead boy in a basement, even then. The need to know was stronger than the need to be safe. On October 29th, at 7:30 in the evening, with the sun already down and the sky purple-black above the trees, Nora Calloway parked her truck at the trailhead near mile marker 104 and started walking west. The towpath was different at night. Everything she knew about it, the way the trees framed the sky, the way the gravel crunched under her boots, the way the canal sat to her left like a long, quiet companion, all of it was the same, but the meaning of it changed. Daylight made it a trail, darkness made it a corridor. A passage between 2 points with no way out except forward or back. She walked for about 40 minutes, mile 105, mile 106, the forest closed in. The trees were mostly bare now, their branches reaching across the path like fingers lacing together above her head. Her flashlight made a cone of white light ahead of her that ended in darkness so complete it looked solid. At mile 107, she stopped. She had heard something. Not the breathing, she had been hearing that since she started walking, a low, subconscious pulse that she could not tell whether it was real or imagined. This was different, this was a voice, it came from the canal. From the black water to her left, Nora. Her name, spoken softly. Spoken the way someone speaks when they are trying to wake you without startling you. The way a parent whispers to a sleeping child. Nora turned off her flashlight. The darkness was total, no moon, no stars, the cloud cover was thick. She stood on the towpath in absolute blackness and listened. Nora. Come here. It was a woman's voice, familiar. Not someone she could place, but familiar in the way that a melody is familiar. You cannot name the song, but your body recognizes it. Who's there? Nora said. Her voice sounded small, swallowed by the trees and the dark and the water. No answer, but the water moved. She heard it, a soft lapping sound as if something had disturbed the surface. Not a splash, not a ripple, a movement like something rising. Nora turned her flashlight back on and pointed it at the canal. The beam hit the water and stopped. That same dead absorption she had noticed before. The light did not penetrate, did not reflect, just ended at the surface, as if the water was made of something that consumed light. But at the edge of the beam, where the light was weakest, she saw something, a hand. A human hand reaching up from the black water, fingers extended, palm open. Just above the surface. The skin was pale, and the fingers were long, and they were perfectly still. As if the hand was being held there by something underneath. Nora's breath stopped. Her training kicked in, the cop training, the ranger training. The human training that tells you what to do when your body wants to freeze. She stepped forward, one step toward the bank, one step closer to the water. The hand did not move. Hello, Nora said. Are you hurt? Do you need help? The hand sank, slowly, deliberately, not pulled down, lowered. The way you lower your hand when you decide to put it down. The fingers went last, tips lingering at the surface for a moment before sliding under. The water was still again. Nora stood at the bank for what felt like an hour, but was probably 90 seconds. She swept her flashlight across the surface. Nothing, black water, still, patient. She made herself breathe, made herself think. Then she did something she would never be able to fully explain. Something that went against her training, her experience, her survival instinct, and everything Glenn had told her. She knelt at the bank, reached down, and put her hand in the water. The warmth hit her immediately. That same impossible warmth, not hot, not uncomfortable, but present. Like holding a living thing. The water closed around her fingers and her wrist, and she felt something that made every hair on her body stand up. Connection, that was the only word for it, a sense of being plugged into something vast and old and aware. The water was not just water, it was a medium. A substance through which something was communicating, the way electricity communicates through wire. And in that connection she felt them, all of them, the teacher, the student, the couple. The photographer, the veteran Paul Dugan, and others, many others. Going back further than 12 years, going back to the canal's beginning. The workers who built it, the boatmen who worked it. The mules that walked the towpath until they dropped. All of them absorbed into the water, dissolved into it. Existing in a state that was not life and not death, but something else entirely. Something the canal had invented for them, a kind of preservation, a keeping. The way a jar keeps fruit, not alive but not gone, and they were not unhappy. That was the thing that nearly broke Nora. They were not suffering. They were not trapped, they were held. Suspended in the warm dark, with the weight of the earth around them, and the slow pulse of the canal moving through them like a heartbeat. They were at peace, And the peace was real, and it was terrible. Because it was the peace of surrender. The peace of giving up the unbearable weight of being alive and sinking into something that asks nothing of you except that you stay. Nora understood then. She understood why the hikers walked barefoot into the black water. Why they left their boots behind. Why they went willingly, without struggle, without fear. Because the canal did not take them, it offered them something, rest, real rest. The kind of rest that the living can never find, because living means carrying. Always carrying, and the weight never gets lighter, it only shifts. And she understood why it was calling her specifically. Because Nora Calloway was carrying something, had been carrying it for 3 years. The face of a 13-year-old boy in a basement, the sound of his mother's scream. The weight of having been too late, the guilt of surviving when someone else did not. It was the same weight that had driven her from Baltimore, that kept her awake at night, that sat in the back of her skull like a stone. The canal knew, the way a predator knows which animal in the herd is limping. It had tasted her grief through the water, through the ground, through whatever invisible threads connected the living to the landscape beneath them. And it was offering her the one thing she could not find on her own. A way to put the weight down. Nora felt her body leaning forward, felt her knees pressing into the soft bank, felt the warmth traveling up her arm and across her shoulder and into her chest where it met the cold, hard knot of everything she had been carrying, and began to soften it. Dissolve it, the way warm water dissolves salt. It would be so easy, one more step. Lean forward, let the water take the weight, let it hold her the way it held the others. No more basement, no more boy, no more guilt, no more dreams. Just warmth and dark, and the slow, steady breathing of something that had been waiting for her since before she was born. Nora closed her eyes. She saw Darius Mitchell, not the way she found him. The way he looked in his school photo, the one his mother had given to the news stations. Smiling, front tooth missing, wearing a blue polo shirt that was one size too big. He looked like a kid who had not yet learned that the world could hurt him. And she heard his mother's voice, not the scream, the other thing. The thing his mother had said to Nora 3 weeks after the funeral. When Nora went to the house to return some of Darius's belongings that had been held as evidence. His mother had opened the door and looked at Nora and said, "You found him. You brought him home, that's all I wanted, for someone to find him." Nora had never let herself hear that. She had only heard the scream, only held the horror. She had taken the worst moment and welded it to her identity and let it define everything that came after. But his mother had not blamed her. His mother had thanked her. Nora opened her eyes. She looked at her hand, submerged in the black water up to her forearm. She felt the warmth. She felt the pull. She felt the promise of release, real and huge and close enough to step into. And she pulled her hand out. The water resisted. Not physically, there was no grip, no suction, no hand grabbing her wrist. But the warmth clung. It did not want to let go. It held onto her skin the way heat holds on to metal, radiating, insisting, saying stay, stay, stay. Nora pulled harder. Her hand came free. The cold November air hit her wet skin, and it hurt. It hurt the way waking up from a beautiful dream hurts. The way reality hurts when the alternative is so much softer. She stood up. Her legs were shaking. Her arm was dripping. The water on her skin was already cooling, turning from that impossible warmth to ordinary cold. She stepped back from the bank. 1 step, 2, 3, back onto the towpath. Back onto solid ground. The canal was still, black and still and silent. But just before she turned to walk back, she heard it one more time, the voice. The woman's voice, and this time she recognized it. It was her own voice. Speaking from the water, speaking from the dark. "It's okay to rest, Nora." And Nora answered out loud to the water, to the canal. to whatever ancient, patient, hungry thing lived inside it. She answered with her voice shaking and her eyes wet and her hand clenched at her side. Not like this. She walked back, mile 107, mile 106, mile 105, mile 104. She did not run. She walked the same way she had walked in, steady, deliberate, one foot in front of the other. The breathing sound faded behind her, the darkness thinned, the trees opened up. She reached her truck and got in and started the engine and sat in the cab with the heater running and looked at her hand. It was clean, dry, no residue, no mark, as if the water had never touched her. She drove to the station. She sat at the table with the 7 files spread in front of her and she wrote a report. A real report, everything she had experienced, everything she had felt. Every detail documented in plain, clear language. She put it in an envelope and sealed it and wrote on the front, "For the next ranger who notices." She put it in the cabinet with the files. Then she called Glenn. "I went to the western stretch," she said. Silence on the other end. "I know what's there." More silence. "I'm not quitting." Glenn exhaled, a long, slow breath. "Why not?" "Because if I leave, the next person who figures it out might not walk away. Someone has to be here to warn them. Someone has to be here who understands what that water does and why people go in and how to resist it." Glenn was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Bill Combs said the same thing before he decided he couldn't." "I'm not Bill." "No," Glenn said slowly. "I don't think you are." Nora hung up. She sat in the station and looked out the window at the dark. The canal was out there, somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the road. Beyond the thin barrier of distance and decision that separated her from it. It was still breathing, she could still feel it, faint, distant. A warmth in her wrist where the water had touched her. A whisper at the back of her mind that said rest, rest, rest. It would be there tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. It would be there for the rest of her life. Nora knew this, she accepted it. The way a recovering addict accepts that the craving will never fully disappear. The way a soldier accepts the sound of a car backfiring. The way anyone who has seen the worst of the world accepts that the seeing cannot be undone. You do not get to unknow things, you only get to choose what you do with the knowing. The next morning, Nora went to work. She patrolled the towpath. She checked trail markers. She talked to hikers about leave no trace. She smiled when it was appropriate, and she was firm when it was necessary, and she did her job. At mile marker 107, she stopped. She looked at the canal. The water was black, still. Silent in the daylight, it looked almost ordinary, almost. She turned and kept walking. But as she passed, she felt it, just for a second, that warmth on her wrist. That pull in her chest, that voice, her own voice, coming from somewhere deep beneath the surface, whispering one more time. "We'll be here when you're ready." Nora did not answer. She kept walking. Her boots crunched on the gravel. The trees stood tall around her. The sky was gray and wide and indifferent, and the canal breathed on. Somewhere between mile 104 and mile 112, the water sits and waits. It has been waiting for 190 years. It does not get impatient. It does not get angry. It simply offers what it has always offered: warmth, stillness, rest, and the terrible mercy of not having to carry the weight anymore. Most people walk past it and feel nothing. The sunlight keeps them safe. The company of others keeps them grounded. They take their photographs and drink their water and go home and never think about the dark strip of liquid beside the towpath. But some people, the broken ones, the carrying ones, the ones who lie awake at 3 in the morning, listening to the sound of their own pulse and wondering if it would be so terrible if it simply stopped. Some people hear it. Some people feel the warmth. and some of them walk in. If you ever find yourself on the B&O Canal towpath, walking west past Hancock, and the sun starts going down, and the water beside you turns from green to brown to black, and the air gets warm when it should be getting cold, and you hear a voice, your own voice, telling you to stop, to rest, to come closer, keep walking.